Chapter 1. Strangled. Hands are around her neck, slowly pressing the life out of her body. She knows she's going to die. She wants to scream but can't. She can't even breathe. The world turns black, and there's a ringing noise in her ears. The ringing doesn't stop. Clea woke up with a shock. She was in her own bed. The clock on the bedside table said 4:26 a.m. Someone was ringing her doorbell. For a moment, she couldn't move. She felt like a swimmer who had nearly drowned in deep water. The dream had been so real, death so close. Finally, she switched on her bedside light. Her hands went up to her neck as she looked around her bedroom. Everything seemed normal, except for the ringing. Whoever was at her door was still there. Clea had a sudden rush of fear. People only rang doorbells or phones so early when it was an emergency. Something terrible has happened, she thought as she jumped out of bed. At the door, she picked up the entry phone. "Hello?" she said. She felt like she was still dreaming. "Clea, it's us," said her mother's voice. She sounded strange. "Mum? Dad?" Clea asked. "What are you doing here?" "We have to come in," her father said. "Then we'll tell you." Clea immediately pressed the buzzer and opened the door of her flat. She heard her parents come up the stairs. When they arrived, their faces were pale. Her mother immediately started to cry. Her father's eyes looked full of pain. "It's your sister," he said. "She's dead." At that moment, Clea's mother collapsed. Together, Clea and her father helped the elderly woman to the sofa. "It can't be true," said Clea. It was like she'd never woken up. It must still be a dream, she thought. "She was murdered," said her father. His eyes filled with tears. "Our beautiful Tessa was murdered." That night, Tessa had had a visitor. She'd poured 2 gin and tonics. Both glasses were still full when the police crime scene investigators arrived 40 minutes later. A neighbor had heard screaming at midnight and called the emergency number. The police found the gin and tonics, made with lemon and ice. They'd also found Tessa, strangled to death, lying on the sofa. Within an hour, journalists and photographers had arrived at the house. Tessa McGowan was a well-known news presenter. She read the big news stories to thousands of television viewers throughout Scotland. Now her own murder was the big news. Later that day, the police called Clea. They wanted to talk to her. She went on the bus to Pitt Street Police Station. The Glasgow streets looked gray and cold. Clea's head felt light, like a balloon. She took out her mobile phone and looked at Tessa's number. They were not only sisters, they were best friends. They talked every day and told each other everything. Now, Tessa would never answer her phone again. Clea got off the bus. Everything she did felt slow. It was like moving through glue. Inside the police station, an officer showed her into a small room. It had a desk and 3 chairs. After a few minutes, he put his head around the door and asked her if she wanted coffee or tea. "No, thank you," she said. She hadn't eaten or drunk all day, but she wasn't feeling like it at all. A short while later, 2 police officers came into the room. They both sat down. "I'm Detective Inspector Shannon Binlow," said the woman. Then she switched on a tape recorder. She said the time and the date. "I'm sorry about your sister," she said in a serious voice. Clea did not reply. Now, Ms. McGowan, D.I. Binlow went on, what can you tell us about Colin McDougal? Colin McDougal? Clea repeated. What has he got to do with this? We've arrested him for murder, D.I. Binlow said. Clea looked at her in shock. Colin was a married man, but he was having an affair with Tessa. It had been going on for more than a year. Clea knew all about Colin. She wasn't happy about the relationship, but he wasn't a bad person. In fact, Clea would have liked him if things had been different. Tessa wanted him to leave his wife. He told her he would, but it was taking him a long time to do it. Tessa was going to break up with Colin, wasn't she? The inspector asked. Yes, but, said Clea. It was true that her sister wanted to end the relationship. The day before the murder, Tessa had called Clea. I can't go on like this anymore, she had said. I'm going to break up with him tonight when I see him. D.I. Binlow looked serious. That night, she told Colin it was over, and he became angry, she said. Then he killed her. No, I don't believe it, Clea exclaimed. She called me. She was still alive when Colin went home. He could get angry sometimes, but we all do. At around 10:30 p.m., Tessa had called her sister again. She told Clea that she hadn't broken up with Colin after all. Instead, he said he would leave his wife soon. Tessa said he was stressed and upset, but things were okay between them when he left. He didn't go home, said D.I. Binlow. He said he drove around in his car for another 3 hours. He has no alibi. He was the last person to see Tessa alive. Witnesses saw him going into the house at 8:30 p.m. The neighbor heard a man shouting at 10 p.m. Colin McDougal has a motive for murder. What motive? Clea asked. Your sister wanted him to leave his wife. She threatened to end the affair if he didn't, Binlow replied. This made him angry, and he has a police record for violence. In 1985, Colin was arrested for fighting outside a pub. One man was hurt, but he must have been about 18 years old, said Clea. She just couldn't believe that Colin was a murderer. Did he ever hurt your sister? The inspector asked. No, she replied. He loved Tessa. Sometimes people kill the ones they love, D.I. Binlow said. When Clea got back from the station, there was a woman standing outside the door. She was holding a big bunch of flowers. It was Valerie Findley, who had worked with Tessa at the television studio. She was a reporter. I was waiting for you, Valerie said. Can I come in? Clea opened the door. I'm sorry, I'm not really in the mood for visitors, she replied. It's just so terrible, Valerie exclaimed. I can't believe it's happened. She gave the flowers to Clea. Thanks, said Clea, but I can't invite you in. I really need to be alone right now. I understand, said Valerie. If you need to talk, please come and find me. Tessa was so clever, so beautiful. She was a wonderful person. Sorry, Clea interrupted. I have to go. She went inside and shut the door, leaving Valerie on the step. As she walked up the stairs, she felt bad. The woman was only trying to help. She'd worked closely with Tessa. I'll call her later in the week, Clea thought. Back inside her flat, she realized that she had many telephone messages. She listened to some of them. Martin McCrae, who read the news with Tessa, a few old friends, a cousin in Edinburgh. There were even some from the adult education college where she worked. She taught art classes there. Some of her colleagues had called. Everyone wanted to say how sorry they were. She put down the phone and went to sit on the sofa. On the bookshelf was a photo of the two sisters. They'd gone on holiday to Florence together 5 years ago. The photo showed them smiling, with the gorgeous city in the background. Clea started to feel angry. Someone had taken Tessa's life away. Was it Colin? The police needed to make an arrest quickly. Tessa was a famous news anchor, so everyone was interested in the murder. It would look good for the police if they immediately found the killer. Clea thought about the last few weeks and about everything that Tessa had said about Colin. He wasn't exactly a good guy, because he had a wife and a girlfriend at the same time. But Colin as a murderer didn't seem right. Suddenly, she remembered something. 1 week ago, the sisters had met for coffee in a cafe. Tessa had been happy. "I found a big news story," she had exclaimed. "I've got some explosive information." Clea asked for more details. Tessa said she'd have to wait and see. "Some people would kill for this information," she said. "I can't tell anybody yet. Not even you, Clea." Clea jumped up and picked up the phone. She called police headquarters and asked for D.I. Binlow. When the inspector answered, Clea told her about Tessa's information. Binlow was not really interested. The police believed that Colin McDougal was guilty. That was the end of the story. "Can I see him?" Clea asked the detective. "You can apply for prison visit papers," Binlow said. "But it will take some time. I know it's hard for you to believe, but McDougal killed your sister. Don't go to see him. It'll only upset you. Perhaps you'd like to contact our victim counseling service." Clea thanked her and hung up. She wanted to hear Colin's side of the story first. She knew that people in prison could get letters. They could send them too. She went to her desk and got some paper and a pen. Then she began to write. "Colin, I can't believe that you killed Tessa. Please tell me it wasn't you. We don't know each other, but I have a lot of reasons to hate you. You had an affair with my sister. You didn't care about your own wife. But I think you are innocent of the murder. I need to know what really happened to Tessa. Please write to me and tell me the truth. Clea McGowan." That afternoon, she took the letter to the prison. She hoped Colin would write back soon. Then she went to Tessa's house to start packing her sister's things. Her father and mother did not want to go. Her mother had gone to the doctor's for some tablets because she couldn't sleep. When she thought of Tessa's murder, she collapsed. She couldn't go out or switch on the TV. The newspapers and the news always had stories about the murder, and Tessa's photo was everywhere. It was hard enough planning the funeral, so Clea said she would go to Tessa's. Her parents wanted her to pack Tessa's books and jewelry. The house was in Pollokshields, just outside the city center. It was a nice, quiet area that had many large houses. Professionals and families lived there. Tessa's house had 3 bedrooms and a beautiful garden. Inside, the police had finished their investigation, and it was as if Tessa had just left. In the bathroom, her face creams and hairbrush were still there. In the bedroom, her pajamas were lying on the bed. It seemed that Tessa would come through the door at any minute. Together, the sisters would cook spaghetti. They would have some red wine and watch a movie. Everything would be normal. Clea went to Tessa's desk and switched on the computer. Tessa's handbag was lying on the desk, too. Clea opened it while the computer started. There was a mobile phone, some makeup, keys, and an appointment book. Clea opened the appointment book and turned to the date Tessa had died. It said, Colin, 8:30 p.m. At around 10:30 p.m., Colin had left. The police believed that he had come back again. Around midnight, there had been a huge argument. The neighbor had heard Tessa screaming and shouting. Clea looked back through the appointments. She saw her own name, the day they met at the cafe. She kept looking back. Then she saw a strange appointment on the 11th. Tessa had written M. 11:15 a.m., Starbucks, Buchanan Street. Next to the information, there was a phone number, too. The only M Clea could think of was Martin McRae. But why would Tessa meet her colleague at Starbucks? They were together all day anyway. Tessa and Martin went to the television station at 9 a.m. in the morning. They worked hard until 9 or 10 p.m. Sometimes they would stay even later. So who was M? Clea turned to the computer. She typed in Tessa's password, George. When they were children, the family had a dog called George. Tessa had really loved him and always used his name as a password. Clea felt guilty about looking at her sister's private papers and emails, but she wanted more information. The police were happy to have Colin under arrest, but it didn't feel right to Clea. Now she had to take on the role of detective. She went through Tessa's emails. There were some from Martin, and some from an old university friend named Maura, both M names. Clea found Maura's number in the appointment book and called her. Maura said she hadn't had a meeting with Tessa on the 11th. She'd seen the news about the murder and was very shocked. Clea told her the funeral was in 2 days' time. After they said goodbye, she went back to the emails. Suddenly, she noticed some from Bonnie McDougal, Colin's wife. It was strange that she was writing to Tessa. Clea opened one of the emails. It seemed that Bonnie knew all about the affair. Clea was shocked to read that Bonnie had threatened to come to Tessa's house and smash all the windows. In another email, she wrote, "I'm watching you. I know where you live." Clea wondered if the police had seen the messages. She thought of calling D.I. Binlow again. Had the police seen the threatening emails? Had they talked to Bonnie? What if she killed Tessa? She thought. There was still the question of the mysterious M. Feeling confused and powerless, Clea walked around the house. She picked up some photos and books. Every time she picked something up, she wanted to cry. Packing Tessa's things was too hard. It would have to wait until another day. Tessa's funeral hadn't even happened yet, and it seemed wrong to be putting things in boxes. Just then, Clea's mobile phone rang. The number didn't look familiar. It was Martin McRae, Tessa's colleague. He started to ask how Clea was feeling, but then began to cry. Clea was surprised. Martin was so cool and calm when he read the news. He asked Clea if she wanted to meet for coffee. She said she would meet him in a few days. Then she told him about M. "Did you have an appointment with Tessa on the 11th?" she asked him. "No," Martin replied. "And I don't know who M is. Tessa never said anything about it. Did she tell you about her secret information? She told me she had a huge news story, Martin said. She was going to research it and break the story at prime time. Prime time? Clea asked. That's the time when most people watch TV, Martin told her. It's about 8 o'clock in the evening. Did she tell you what the story was about? She said it was totally secret, Martin said. She wouldn't even tell me. A big, important story is good for the career. I think she hoped to get her own current affairs show. I need to know what it was, said Clea. She said people would kill for this information, and now she's dead. She wrote a phone number down next to the name M, and I think I'm going to call this person. You should go to the police, Martin said. The police won't listen to me. They think her boyfriend is guilty, but I don't, she said. There's something strange going on here, and I want to find out what it is. I want to know who M is. Chapter 2, Threatened. Clea said goodbye to Martin and put down the phone. She thought about the famous Hitchcock movie called Dial M for Murder. Then she picked up the phone again. She dialed and heard ringing at the other end. A man answered and said hello. He sounded nervous. My name is Clea McGowan, Clea said. The man said nothing. Hello? She asked. Are you still there? I'm still here, he replied finally. What do you want? I want to know if you had an appointment with my sister Tessa, Clea said. She felt nervous herself. We met on the 11th, he said. We were going to meet again on the 15th. I waited at the cafe for 3 hours, but she never showed up. Then I saw the news. I'm sorry your sister is dead. Goodbye. Wait, Clea shouted down the phone. Don't hang up. Suddenly the man's voice became very low. It's dangerous for you to talk to me. What do you mean? She asked. Who are you? Did you kill my sister? I think my information killed her, he said. I believe they've arrested the wrong man. What is this information? Clea asked. I have to know. Please meet me. The Starbucks on Buchanan Street tomorrow morning at 9:30, the man said simply. I'll be wearing a green scarf. Then he hung up. Clea stood for a moment looking at the phone. Meeting this unknown man was a big risk, but she had to know the truth. She made a quick call to Martin. He didn't answer his phone, so she left a message about meeting M. Then she put on her coat and hat. She picked up Tessa's appointment book and found Colin's address. There were many motives for murder, and Bonnie McDougal had one of them: jealousy. If Clea was now a detective, she had to get as many facts as possible. A short time later, she arrived outside the McDougal house. She was shocked to see news reporters and cameramen outside. They took some photos of her, and one even called out her name. They knew she was Tessa's sister. She didn't speak to them. At the front door, she rang the doorbell. A short, thin woman answered it, but only opened the door enough to put her head around it. What do you want? She asked. I don't talk to reporters. I'm Tessa's sister, Clea replied. Go away! Bonnie suddenly shouted. She tried to close the door, but Clea put out her foot and held the door open. She heard cameras taking pictures and wondered how it would be reported in the news the next day. Let me in or I'll tell these news reporters about the emails, Clea said quietly. She didn't really want to do that, but she had to get inside somehow. Finally, Bonnie let Clea in. Before Clea could speak, Bonnie turned around and started to cry. "I know he didn't kill your sister," she said. "I am 100% sure he didn't kill her." "I think Colin is innocent too," said Clea, sitting down on the sofa. "The real murderer is out there somewhere. Perhaps he or she feels guilty that an innocent man is in prison. If the real killer confessed, Colin would be freed." She looked at Bonnie seriously. "What are you saying?" Bonnie said. "Do you think I did it? You wrote threatening emails to Tessa. The police would probably be very interested in those emails." "I was very angry when I wrote those emails," Bonnie said. "I was so jealous. Colin stayed out late. His behavior changed. I wanted to hurt your sister and I hated her. But I didn't kill her." Clea stood up. "Maybe you did," she said. "Maybe you followed Colin to Tessa's house that night. You hear them have an argument. You see Colin leave. You wait a bit and then ring Tessa's bell. She lets you in because she can see you're upset. She makes some drinks and tries to talk with you. But you threaten her, you shout at her, then you strangle her." "No," Bonnie exclaimed. "I didn't do it. I was away that night. My friend was getting married and we had a hen party in Edinburgh. I have an alibi. You have an excellent motive for murder. Were you jealous enough to kill my sister?" Clea exclaimed. "Get out of my house now!" Bonnie yelled. "I'll call the police if you don't go." Clea didn't say another word. She went to the front door. As soon as she opened it, she heard cameras. The reporters started shouting. Bonnie shut the door with a loud bang, and Clea set off towards the bus stop. The reporters followed her for a while, asking questions. When she didn't answer, they gave up. As Clea got on the bus, she thought about Bonnie. She was a small, thin woman, but anger gave people extra strength. She could have strangled Tessa. Tessa was dead, and Colin was in prison. Bonnie had perhaps taken revenge on the two people who had hurt her. However, there was the hen party. That was a problem. Maybe Bonnie had 5 or 6 alibis, or maybe she didn't. Clea decided she would write to Colin again and ask him for the names of Bonnie's friends. Then she would visit the friends, even if she had to use Tessa's car and drive to Edinburgh. The women would remember Bonnie at the party. That is, if Bonnie was telling the truth. At the same time, she felt sorry for Bonnie. She had lost her husband first to Tessa and then to prison. After getting off the bus, she walked up her street. Someone was standing at the door of the house. It was Valerie Findlay again. Clea was not happy to see her. Of course, Valerie cared, but Clea just wanted to be alone. Although she was a colleague, Tessa hadn't really liked the woman. They saw each other at parties, but they were never friends, unlike Tessa and Martin. "Hello, Valerie," said Clea. "I'm very worried about you," Valerie said. "I spoke to Martin. He told me all about the mysterious man Tessa was meeting for information." Clea unlocked the door. Together, the women went up the stairs to the flat. Once inside, Valerie took off her coat. "Meeting this man alone is too dangerous," she said. "I think someone should go with you." "I'm fine on my own," Clea replied. "We're meeting at Buchanan Street Starbucks. There'll be lots of people around." "It's not a game, Clea," Valerie exclaimed. "You're not really a detective. I think Colin McDougal is the murderer, but maybe it was someone else. You can't be sure. I'm going to come with you. He can't hurt you if there are two of us. Clea didn't want Valerie to come, but she was right. It might be dangerous. It was better to have a witness. Okay, she said. We'll go together, but I want to talk to M alone first. He might be angry that I've brought someone else, but I'll get him to talk to us both. The next morning, Clea had a quick breakfast. The post arrived. There were a few cards from friends and family. There was also a letter from Colin. As she read it, Clea felt like crying. Dear Clea, I am so sorry for hurting your sister. She wanted me to leave my wife, but I wasn't brave enough to. However, I loved Tessa with all my heart. We had an argument that night, but I didn't kill her, and that's the truth. I cry every night because she's gone. I tell them over and over I didn't do it. I didn't go home for a long time because I was upset and I didn't know what to do. I should have left my wife a long time ago. If I had, Tessa would still be alive. I decided to leave my wife the next day, but now it's too late and Tessa will never know how much I loved her. Please believe me, Clea, I didn't do it. Colin. Clea believed him. She'd been unhappy about the affair. Sometimes she had been angry with Colin, and with Tessa too. However, Colin wasn't a bad man. He'd just done the wrong thing. Now Clea had to find out who really killed Tessa. If the police wouldn't start a new investigation, Clea would have to do so alone. Chapter 3. Scared. At 9:25, Valerie and Clea met at Starbucks. Valerie sat at another table. She agreed that Clea would go up to the man alone and explain that she'd brought someone else. Then they would talk to M together. Clea looked around. Right at the back of the cafe, she saw a man with a green scarf. He had a brown jacket, dark brown hair, and was wearing glasses. He looked about 35 years old. He also seemed nervous. Clea went up to him and introduced herself. Then she sat down. I need to know why my sister died, she said. She didn't want to make small talk. How dangerous is this information, really? There's a lot of money at stake, the man replied. He didn't want small talk either. Hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of pounds. That kind of money can make people kill. Who are you? Clea asked. My name is Marcus, said the man. I'm a scientist. Clea looked surprised. A scientist? What do you know about Tessa's murder? She asked. I feel it's my fault, Marcus replied. I contacted Miss McGowan because I needed to tell somebody about all of this. I'm just a scientist, but your sister knew all about news and information. I needed help and thought she was the right one to help me. I knew the information was dangerous. Now she's dead. So I'm guilty of her murder. But you didn't kill her, Clea said. Look, you need to tell me the whole story. I've brought someone with me who can help too. What? Marcus yelled. He stood up. I wanted you to come alone. I think they're watching me. It's very dangerous. Calm down, Clea said. Valerie is a reporter. She was a colleague of Tessa's. If they see me with a reporter, I could end up dead, said Marcus, sitting down again. So could you. Who are you talking about? Asked Clea. Who are they? She was starting to get worried. She looked around the room. Perhaps someone was watching them all the time. Alone, she and Marcus could be two friends, but Valerie was on TV. Everyone would recognize her. If you think this reporter can help, I'll talk to her, said Marcus. But you're both taking a risk by speaking to me. Clea looked over to Valerie and made a sign for her to join them. She came over and put out her hand for Marcus to shake. Then the three of them sat down together. Valerie had a cup of coffee with her, but Clea was too nervous to drink anything. She wondered how Valerie could be so calm. Marcus told them that he wanted to go to the police, but was too frightened. The police might not be interested, he said. Then my life will be in danger because they'll know I went to the police. Please tell us everything, said Clea. Right from the beginning, Valerie added. Then we can decide what to do. Marcus opened his leather bag and pulled out some documents in a file. Then he told them about his job as a scientist. A large multinational company wanted to build a processing plant just outside Glasgow. The area was famous for its beauty and had lots of different kinds of plants and animals. A processing plant might threaten the ecosystem, so scientists had to study the area first. The research would show if it was safe to build the processing plant. After the research was finished, the government had the power to say yes or no to the company. The company paid a team of scientists to study the area, and Marcus was one of them. These documents show the results of the research, Marcus said, holding up the file. They were given to the government. The results are good. The environment won't be threatened, and the processing plant will be built. The men who run the company will make millions of pounds, and there'll be new jobs in the area. So, what's the problem? Clea asked. Why are the documents so dangerous? Marcus answered very quietly. The results are false, he said. The company is paying some of the scientists in more ways than one. They're paid to do the research, and then they're paid extra money to make the results false. I found out. I also have other documents which show the real results of the research. Certain kinds of plants that are important to the ecosystem will be threatened. It's too dangerous to build the processing plant there. It would be very bad for the environment. That's terrible, Clea exclaimed. How could anyone do that? It's about money, Marcus replied. I think someone in the government is involved too. Perhaps the company is paying him to help. So you contacted Tessa, said Clea. You wanted her to break the story. Yes, Marcus said. I thought everybody should know. I needed the help of a journalist. Tessa was famous and important, so people would listen to her. Tessa and I planned to hire a private detective to follow the men from the company. We wanted to follow the scientists and the government officer too. We needed to get as much extra information as possible. The truth is, lots of people could end up in prison. That's why the information is so dangerous. There's one big boss of the company and he could end up in prison himself. He'd lose his luxury lifestyle. It could threaten the whole company internationally. Think of all the money. Why didn't you go to the police straight away? Asked Clea. I thought that a government official was involved. Also, the company boss, Mr. Wester, is a multimillionaire. All that power and money can make documents and even people disappear. Did you give some documents to Tessa? Clea asked. She had copies, yes, Marcus replied. I didn't see them in her desk. I wonder where they could be. Clea thought for a moment about Tessa's murder. She imagined the scene. A man phones Tessa that night and says he has information about the research. He says he's a scientist, someone who knows the real results. Like Marcus. At home, Tessa waits for Colin. He arrives and they argue. At around 10:30 p.m., he leaves and drives round and round the streets. He doesn't want to end the affair, but he doesn't want to upset his wife. Meanwhile, Tessa's next visitor arrives, the false scientist. She's happy to see him because he has more information. But he doesn't help her. Instead, he strangles her to death. What if Tessa told the murderer that you had documents and wanted to make them public? Clea asked Marcus. Maybe she didn't have to, he replied. Maybe they already knew about me and I led them to her. It would have been easy for them to follow me when I met her here the first time. But I don't really understand why I'm still alive. Every time I go out or the doorbell rings, I think that my life is over. There's only one thing to do, Clea said. Yes, Valerie exclaimed. You must give the information to me. No, Clea and Marcus said at the same time. I'll hire a private detective myself, then break the news story, Valerie said, putting her hand on the documents. Tessa was murdered, Clea said angrily. Perhaps it was because of this information. Tessa should have gone to the police, and now we have to, Valerie. Absolutely, said Marcus. We'll be safer if we go together. The three of us can't be killed all at once. The murderer has been found, Valerie said. Colin McDougal did it. The information won't kill me, and I need you to give it to me now. Clea and Marcus looked at each other. Slowly, Clea shook her head. You can't be sure, Valerie, she said. Suddenly, Valerie jumped up out of her chair. You will not go to the police, she shouted. Someone else will get the story then, and my chance will be gone. Everyone in the cafe looked at her. She sat down again and spoke in a low voice. I deserve it. I should have been news anchor already, not Tessa. Now the station needs a new one, and that's going to be me. I'm not going to do boring reports about festivals and lost dogs anymore. This information will make my career, so don't stand in my way. She quickly picked up the documents from the table, then stood up and ran out of the cafe. Clea was shocked. Valerie had used her to get the information. Her offer of help hadn't been real. She couldn't move for a moment, but then jumped up and ran out after Valerie. She saw Valerie run along the street until she found a taxi. Then she got into it and drove away. Clea was left standing on the street alone. A minute later, Marcus came up behind her. She only has copies of the documents, he said. I have the original ones at home. We should go to the police together, Clea said. Valerie's life could be in danger. She felt like crying. Valerie's bitter words had upset her, and she remembered what Tessa had said about her colleague. She can smile and be sweet to your face. But then, when she turns away, her smile disappears. Marcus put his hand on Clea's arm. Let's go to the police immediately, he said. Chapter 4. Hunted at Pitt Street Police Station, they asked for Detective Inspector Binlow. She didn't look happy to see Clea again. A witness saw Colin McDougal's car near Tessa's house at 11:15 p.m., Binlow said. Have you come to tell me he's innocent? If so, you're wasting your time. Marcus stepped forward. He told Binlow all about the false research results. He told her how Tessa had become involved. Then together he and Clea explained that Valerie Findlay had run off with the information. The DI was curious. "This company has done something totally illegal," she said. "And we have special officers who deal with this kind of crime. I'll call them right now. Can you stay here until they've talked to you?" Clea and Marcus were glad someone was listening to them. Binlow had realized how serious it was, although she still didn't believe it had anything to do with the murder. "One more thing, Ms. McGowan," said Binlow before she left. "You seem to be playing private detective. It's a bad idea. Leave the investigations to the police. That's our job." Clea said nothing. She was happy that Binlow was taking them seriously and that an investigation would start. But until the real murderer was arrested, she would keep searching for clues. Clea and Marcus waited for half an hour. Finally, 2 other officers came into the room. They wanted to hear the story and needed to see the original documents. One of the officers said he would go home with Marcus and get them. Clea was free to go, but Marcus was worried. He wanted a police officer to go with Clea too. Her life could be in danger, he said. "We don't know that," said the officer. "But if it makes you feel better, we'll drive by Miss McGowan's house every hour tonight. But until we know you are in genuine danger, we can't give you an officer for full-time protection. We're really busy trying to deal with all the crime in this city. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is." Marcus wrote down his address and phone number and gave them to Clea. "Please call me every few hours," he said. "I want to know you're okay. If you're frightened or need any help, just call or come over to the flat. I'm not very brave, but I don't want anything to happen to you." "Thanks," said Clea. "Here's my address and phone number too. I'm not very brave either, but I can call the police." Clea caught a bus home. She thought about Marcus. Already he felt like a friend. The fact was, however, she knew nothing about him. Was he telling the truth? The research documents looked real, but it would be easy to make those. All you needed was a computer. Now she'd given him her address and phone number. He seemed nice, and she felt she could trust him. But perhaps she was wrong. Now, for some reason, she felt nervous about going home. At the next stop, near the George V Bridge, she got off the bus. She took out her mobile phone and Tessa's appointment book, found Valerie's number, and dialed it. There was no answer. The police said they would contact Valerie immediately. Maybe she was with them right now. Clea just had to hope for the best. She thought about Marcus again. His flat was near Pitt Street Police Station, so it wouldn't take him long to give the documents to the officer. Then what would he do? Would he be safe at home? Could she trust him? Marcus said the scientists were paid a lot of extra money for giving false research results. Was it enough money to kill for? Clea had so many questions and no answers. She walked along the bridge and looked down at the River Clyde. In wintertime, there was always a lot of water, and the river was flowing very fast. She stopped on the bridge and looked over. She thought about the times she and Tessa had walked through Glasgow city centre. They had shopped and gone to cafes and art galleries. Tessa had loved the artist Rennie Mackintosh, so they often went to the cafe at the Mackintosh Gallery. Now Clea was alone. Her sister and best friend was dead. Suddenly she heard a loud noise behind her. It sounded like car tires. She looked around and was shocked to see a dark car with dark windows had driven right off the street. It was driving up onto the pedestrian walkway and was heading straight for Clea. She was alone on the bridge, and there was nowhere for her to run. Clea got up onto the side of the bridge and jumped. She heard the car crash into the side of the bridge. Then the tires made a screaming noise as the car pulled away again. Suddenly, she was underwater. The cold was a huge shock. She'd hit the water very hard, so for a moment she was confused and her head hurt. She couldn't breathe. "I'm going to drown," she thought. It took a lot of effort to move her arms and legs, but finally, she managed to swim upwards towards the air. She managed to get her head above water and take a few deep breaths. Water was in her mouth and nose, and she was almost crying. The river flowed so fast it simply pulled her along. She couldn't swim against it. The riverbank rushed past on both sides. She tried to swim towards it, but she wasn't strong enough to fight the water. Just then, she saw two people, a man and a woman. They were slowly walking along the riverbank. When they saw Clea, they started to shout and wave their arms. But the river was too fast. Clea saw the woman take out her mobile phone. Then they were too far away for her to see any more. Buildings went past quickly on each side. The water was cold, too cold. Clea could feel the energy disappearing from her body, and the water was pulling her under again. It suddenly seemed easier to simply give up, stop fighting, and go under. Then she thought of her parents. One daughter murdered, the other drowned. They would never get over it. She had to make one last effort. There were trees and bushes along the riverbank. Using all her strength, Clea tried to swim towards them. She got a little bit closer and closer still. The current wasn't as strong towards the edge of the river. It was getting easier to swim. Finally, she could reach out her hand towards some bushes that were low down, close to the water. They had no leaves, but they were strong. With a final burst of energy, she pulled herself up out of the water, then fell into the mud of the riverbank. She turned onto her back, breathing quickly. All her energy was gone and she was freezing cold. Her bag was still across her body. She slowly sat up and opened the bag. Everything inside was totally wet. Her mobile phone had stopped working. She looked around, but there were no people. There was a street not far away. She managed to stand up, but her legs were not working properly. It wasn't easy to walk, and she felt sick. On the street, a few cars drove past. The drivers saw her but didn't stop. After a few minutes, a truck came along, and Clea was relieved to see the driver pull over at the side of the road. He opened the door. "What happened to you?" he asked, starting to laugh. Then he looked at Clea's face. "I fell into the river," she said. Her clothes and hair were wet. She was shaking with shock and cold. "You don't want to go swimming in the Clyde in winter," said the truck driver. "It's too cold. Summer is better. Do you need a ride?" Clea said yes and got into the truck. She knew she should tell the police immediately that somebody had tried to kill her. All she could think about, however, was getting home. She wanted a hot shower and dry clothes. The truck driver took her right to her front door. Clea thanked him. "Will you be okay?" he asked. I think so, she replied. I just need to get warm. She went inside. After showering, she put on some clean, warm pajamas and went into the living room. She was still shaking badly. She opened her bag and took out the paper with Marcus's number on it. It was wet, but she could just read the numbers. She dialed his home, but there was no answer. Then she tried his mobile, but all she got was his voicemail. She didn't leave a message. "Where is he?" she said out loud. Then she called the police and asked for D.I. Shannon Binlow. The detective asked her a few questions, but Clea couldn't offer much help. The car had been dark, with dark windows. She hadn't seen the driver and didn't even know what kind of car it was. Her memories were mainly of being in the water, choking, not able to breathe. Binlow said she would come to the house right away and told Clea to lock the door until she arrived. "I'm starting to think you could be right," Binlow said. "Maybe McDougal is innocent after all. Switch on your TV." Clea put down the phone and switched on her television. The news had just started. Martin, Tessa's colleague, was reading it. The picture showed the police arresting a businessman who was wearing an expensive suit. They were taking him to a waiting police car. Martin said that the man was Mr. Charles Wester. Marcus had talked about Wester that morning. She turned up the sound on the TV. The report said that Wester paid scientists for false research results. Then the picture changed to show a beautiful landscape. There were many tiny plants and animals that played an important role in the ecosystem of the area. Martin explained that 2 other company managers, a government officer, and 3 scientists were also being questioned. "There may be a connection with the murder of my friend and colleague Tessa McGowan," Martin said. "Police have started an investigation. This could be good news for Colin McDougal, who is under arrest for the murder." Clea felt she could breathe again. Maybe the real killer would be found, and Colin would be free. She was about to try calling Marcus again when the doorbell rang. She went to the entry phone and picked it up. "Hello?" she said. She hoped it was either the police or Marcus. Instead, it was Valerie. "Clea, you have to let me in. It's very important," she said. "I don't want to talk to you," Clea said. "You used me to get that information. You only thought about your career." "I'm sorry," said Valerie. "Look, I was wrong to behave that way, but now I really need to see you. Let me in." "You can come in for a minute," Clea said. "But I'm still very angry." She pressed the buzzer and opened the door of her flat. She heard Valerie come up. When she reached the top of the stairs, Clea was shocked to see her face. The woman looked pale. "What's the matter?" Clea asked. Valerie came through the door and didn't even close it behind her before she started shouting. "You gave those documents to the police!" she exclaimed. "Yes, we thought," Clea started to say. "I told you not to," Valerie said. "That was my story." "Please don't be so upset, Valerie," said Clea. "I need to know who killed my sister. Maybe an innocent man is in prison." "I don't care about him," Valerie yelled. "That information would have made my career." She reached over to the coffee table and picked up a glass candle holder. Then she threw it against the wall, where it smashed into tiny pieces. Clea suddenly felt frightened. "Please calm down," Clea said. "I want to be the news anchor," Valerie screamed. "I'm sick of watching people like Tessa and Martin get to the top. Tessa was in my way, but I had a chance until you came along playing detective. What do you mean? Clea asked. Suddenly, Valerie's voice became very soft and quiet. I thought I was rid of you when you went over the bridge. She came closer to Clea. With every step she took, Clea tried to move away, but Valerie followed her. Yes, Valerie went on. I thought you'd drowned. You're crazy, Clea exclaimed. You tried to run me over with a car. She moved towards the phone, but Valerie saw what she was doing. She picked up the phone and pulled it hard. The cord came out of the wall. Then she held the cord in both hands. Tessa was easy to get rid of, Valerie said. I went to her house late that night. Lucky for me, Colin had just been there too. She made us gin and tonics and told me to calm down. But how could I be calm? For years I watched her push her way to the top. She stole my dream, my career. That's not true, said Clea. Tessa was a wonderful journalist. She worked hard for the news anchor job. She had everything I wanted. I hated her, Valerie said. You killed her, said Clea, finally understanding. Yes, Valerie said. Now you know, but nobody else will ever find out. She came towards Clea, the phone cord still in her hands. Clea found herself backed up against the living room wall. There was no way to get past Valerie. Suddenly, the telephone cord was around her neck. She was choking. She tried to push Valerie away, but the woman was stronger. The world started to go black. At that very moment, Valerie collapsed. Clea immediately put her hands up to her neck and tried to breathe again. Valerie was on the floor, and around her head were bits of smashed pottery. There was soil and some kind of plant, too. Clea was confused. Then she looked up and saw Marcus. He was simply standing there, pale and shaking. I hit her on the head with the plant, he said. I brought it as a gift. I wanted to ask you out for a drink to celebrate. It was lucky that the door was open. He was so shocked he couldn't help laughing. Good timing, said Clea. She almost laughed too. Then she started to cry. Just then, D.I. Binlow came through the door. She looked at Clea, at Marcus, and at Valerie on the floor. Valerie was still unconscious, with the phone cord in her hands and bits of plant, soil, and pottery in her hair. This should make a good story, Binlow said. Who wants to start?